I'd like to welcome our question and answer portion. This is for the creative side of things with the Worship Creative Production Conference. So we have, it was, hold on, I can't look here. It was first name, oh my goodness. Wasn't it Katelyn? Was it Katelyn? Katelyn Deitz, right? And where are you from, Katelyn?
I'm from a church called Fresh Life in Kalispell, Montana.
Nice.
So the snow's got me feeling right at home.
All right, awesome. Well, we're grateful to have you. And then this is Royce Rull. So I didn't look at the screen. All right, Royce Rull.
So my name is Royce Rull, and I'm from, oh my gosh, I forgot. Temecula, California.
I was like, don't ask me.
I was thinking about where Katelyn's from. I'm from Temecula, California, and I serve at a church named Reliance Church. And we have fake snow because it's California. You know?
All right,
so
hey, that's all good.
We get flurries.
Nice.
It doesn't stick to the ground.
Awesome. Well, for the question and answer portion, because we are recording it, you won't be on the video, but your voice will be, because we would like that you could hear what the question is. The panel may repeat the question, but what I'll do is I'll just be walking around with the wireless. So if you don't mind, just ask your question, get their attention, raise your hand, however they would instruct you to get their attention. I'll run around with the mic and we'll turn it over. Go ahead and get started.
Amazing. Well, Royce, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do? Okay. So the fine folks who haven't had the opportunity to meet know what you do and what you're part of.
So if you guys weren't in my workshop, so my kind of expertise, I guess, I kind of lean towards more like graphic design. And in my church, I'm a design lead. And so I lean towards more graphic design and like kind of set design and like a lot of like the branding stuff for like different projects and events. And then as far as like a little bit, I do a little bit of social media, and I do mostly like our young adults in our youth ministries. So that's really fun because I feel like it's so, if you went to Katelyn, so different from like the main service, like kind of like, social media. You have a little bit more freedom to be expressive, but yeah, that's kind of like where and then also I'm, since I was younger, I've always like illustrated. So I love, kind of like Katelyn Taylor, like I love drawing like kind of cartoons and, like characters and stuff. So that's always been like a big thing for me.
That's amazing. How long have you been doing that at your church, and how long have you been a part of your church before that?
I've been serving at my church so she asked how long I've been at my church. I've been serving at my church for about 4 years. I've been on staff there for about, I believe it's almost 2.5 years. And then, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. So my role is the digital communications director. So I oversee social media, digital marketing, a little bit of web stuff, and then I oversee our video team. And I work closely with graphic designers and all the people that make the pretty things, but I don't have my hand in that as much as more of the strategy and direction and some of all of that stuff. So, and I've been on staff at my church for 6 years as of this week. So that's a little bit about the world that we're living in. So obviously we're here to take your questions. So if anybody has any questions, you can shoot your hand up about anything: graphics, creative,
social media
team
marketing,
structure, social media marketing, or anything else. And we may or may not have an answer, but you can ask it.
Or even things that if you went to our workshops, like pertaining to like stuff that you might have like remembered now, like, from then. So.
A microphone is coming to you.
Keegan's going to come to you guys.
He's going to get his workout.
I was just going to ask, are you, in your umbrella, do you cover a photography team as well? And then what are parameters for things like maybe not permissions per se, but, we're a smaller church, so we run into the occasional person who doesn't want their picture online or whatever. Like, do you have things set in place or guidelines for shot lists and then how to run a photography team?
Yeah, so I don't know if you do this, but you can speak to if you do it differently. Our photographer kind of falls more under our art director, but there's a big crossover with social media, obviously, because that's where the photos are going. So there is it's a little bit of both. As far as permissions, I think it's funny, this has come up a few times, and I feel like I've heard it like tackled a few different ways. So I guess it's obviously a question with your leadership and how you guys want to handle that personally. But for us, we have like pre-roll that goes before our gatherings with like announcements, and it just kind of rolls on the screen. And one of the things in our pre-roll is like a photo permissions, and it's not written in a weird like legal way. It's more just like, I think it's like smile and say cheese. If you're in here, we're taking photos. And I haven't personally heard of anybody like having an issue with their photo being taken, and so I can't speak to exactly how that would have been addressed or handled. But we do let people know that their photos are being taken. And then for kids, it's different. We make sure that we have permission from parents, and any kids who don't want their photos taken, or parents who don't want photos taken of their kids, have like a different sticker on their like check-in. You know, they get like a little badge or whatever sticker when they check in. And so we just put like a blue sticker on there so that it's easy for a photographer to know like, oh, don't capture. Or if you do and they happen to be in a photo, that's not one that we're going to use. And so that's how we handle it on the front end. As far as the back end of somebody asking for their photo not to be taken, I mean, obviously there's just a level of respect in not taking a photo of someone who doesn't want to, but I can't necessarily speak directly to how we have handled that because I haven't run into that myself.
Yeah, I think ours is very similar. We haven't really run into problems with like photos, but I think the filter part of the photos, because our photographers, we don't have like a big photography team. We have like a few volunteers like you. Sometimes I do it, if I'm not doing worship and stuff. And we usually like have a kind of like just a style guide shot list and kind of remember those things. And in a shot list, we also have like samples of like, these are from other churches. Like these are like kind of moments that you can capture because sometimes people are not visual. So seeing like an example kind of helps them like see that. But also, I think for like the sake of like the discretion, I'll give you this example. We have a really huge Chinese ministry in our church, and the lady that leads kind of like that ministry, she kind of goes back to China. So in discretion of like her ministry, when we take pictures of her, it's usually just her back or like her, like, like we don't show her face, So that's kind of like one of the biggest things that we have to let people know. And as far as kids, I believe our kids ministry kind of signs like a, like when kids are like checked in or like, they have to sign like a waiver of like, we do take photos of our ministries. And then we just, when we take photos, we just kind of ask before we post things like, is this, are these children in the don't photograph them list? So we're aware that they shouldn't be posted and stuff. So
another thing I would say, which we don't do this, but I just remembered Katelyn Taylor was saying here, she takes photos here. She was saying they have like a route kind of that it's like, parameters of where in the sanctuary they're going to take good photos, and kind of for one reason to kind of stay out of people's way and just kind of know where their like route or their path is. So you could maybe come up with an area of like, this is where we're generally standing taking photos. And so if you don't want your photo to be taken, maybe this spot of the sanctuary would be a good place like for you. So maybe you just have an area where you kind of avoid. And then if you have a person that's like struggling, it can be like, hey, you can like, we stay away from this side intentionally. So if you want to sit over there, then you won't be in the photos, or just kind of like tackle it that way.
I think for your photographers too, just having that awareness of like, okay, maybe don't get too close in someone's space, especially like, when just emotions are running through like, just moments of worship and the word, it's like, you don't want to take a picture of someone just like bawling their eyes out and just, it's embarrassing, So, and also I think the biggest thing our social media manager tells me is that before even like taking photos, sometimes you don't catch this when you just look at the overall picture, even the people in the back, sometimes like we had, this beautiful moment where like someone's just like praying for someone, but then like there's somebody in the back eating like a burrito, so it's just kind of like just be like just the overall picture, just be aware of that because then you don't catch that. And then you're like, oh, I posted someone eating a burrito and with this beautiful like moment of prayer, so yeah. That was a good question.
Yes, there's a microphone coming to you so that people on the recording can hear you.
How do you incorporate your other type of creatives into your church, or do you not?
What do you mean by other? Can you give me a couple examples?
Yes, so there may be people who like painting or,
gotcha.
I don't know, you have your writers or
dancers
other things that don't fall
gotcha.
under the normal creative tracks.
I guess I'll answer that first. So, loving like design, all these things, I'm like the worst in like measuring things, like especially in scaling bigger things. So, obviously I concept all the things with like, especially I'll use Easter as an example. When we build sets kind of like for the stage and just, photo areas for like, like it's such a special event, right? I'm not a carpenter. So like, this is where we kind of able to rally up like people who are builders and painters and just like knowing those people like that don't necessarily serve on a daily basis, but they are kind of like the reserve people that that these people are gonna do. They're like a master artist for these for these kind of skill sets. So we have those people kind of in line, especially like a big example. I don't know if you guys do Vacation Bible School. VB is such a big thing because we build sets and little kind of areas for like the presentation. And so this is where kind of like handy work comes in like really well, like carpenters and painters and so that's kind of like where we utilize those type of like creatives. And then as far as like like writers and poets, there's one Easter that we wanted like and this is tying in closely with like videographers. We wanted some kind of a poetry in relation to like the theme of our Easter, like going into I don't think it was Easter. I think it was a youth high school summer camp. And so in relation to like the theme, like, and we wanted some kind of a spoken word or poetry coinciding with the video. So that's where we kind of like draw like having spoken word artists and like people that are into writing and stuff like that. And then copy is a big thing. So if you don't have if you have someone in your church that's really like a writer or someone who's like just in literature, they are amazing people to really like what do you call it? Like kind of like look at over like stuff that you want to present like in a bigger scale. And so it helps that our social media is such a writer. So like copy wise, I don't have to worry about like posting like because I'm not really like big on like words. So like I feel like they are able to express and rewrite it much more what do you call that? Much more eloquently when it comes to like the social media and presentation of those. But
yeah, that's good. I would say we handle it very similarly. We like have people who we know what they do, and we just call on them for specific things. And we also help like paint that clear picture for them that like this isn't going to be like an every week thing, so that they're not like disappointed or feeling underutilized. Like, hey, like get on a team that you can serve on the regular, and then when there's special occasions where like we can use that gifting, then we have the person to do it. Another way I would say is like for anybody who designs, not like forgetting that not everything has to be made in Photoshop. Like there is a way so for those of you that were in my my breakout yesterday, and I showed a couple different carousels, but there was one, if you remember, and it looked like painting, like the backgrounds were all these like painted things. And those were real paintings. So instead of creating that on Photoshop, it's like thinking, how can we build something or create something and work with our hands just as a different medium? It's a way to exercise your creativity, think outside of the box a little bit. And so we had a crew of people come in and like paint these canvases. And it was a really fun team building thing to do together. We got coffee and we just painted, and then we photographed those paintings and we turned it into series art. We used it on screen support. We used it on social media. And so I think there will be opportunities, weekend stuff, set stuff, programming stuff, Christmas, Easter. There's a lot of opportunities for that. And then just as people who design and create, thinking, how can I do something that's not digital and include that type of art and bring it into a digital format after. But just kind of thinking beyond like everything having to be done in Photoshop is another cool way. But yes, we handle it similarly, just kind of keeping those people on our team and knowing what they do so that you have somebody when you need them.
Yeah. So, and also I think about my church is kind of like a medium-sized church, and I came from a smaller church, and I always think about like sometimes resources are very limited. And so for example, like when we wanted to do like you can't just order curtains or something, right? And knowing that we have like seamstresses and like tailors at church, like these people are willing to like volunteer their time to like help with those kind of things, even like make like costumes or maybe robes for like like a kids choir or something. Mm-hmm. These are like just having that kind of like pool of people that you're able to like kind of use during like different seasons in the year. It's always like such a kind of awesome way to kind of have him be part of the team. It might not be every day, but like Katelyn said, like it does, and also the medium doesn't have to be also like always graphics, because for example, like I work in the youth ministry, I do a lot of their stuff, but sometimes I feel like it'd be nice to do something more of a fine arts rather than like something digital. So I'll be like, if we know like kids that are like dabbling in art, I was like, hey, for example, like Noah, can you do something some kind of characters that would go in this, like, this is a theme. Can I have some guidelines for them? And it also teaches them kind of like, it's like discipleship in a way. It teaches them to kind of what it's like to work with creatives and in a creative space, and learning how to, kind of complete a task for a project. And so it's like allowing people, giving them the platform opportunities, just like we've been giving the opportunity to grow in our kind of like, where we're at now and stuff.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good question. Thank you. Yes. Yes. The microphone's behind you.
Kind of a two-folded question. This is more about the team building. How do you build that team? I'm sure there are, and maybe you don't go through this. We are a church of about 600-700 people and have a team of 10-ish, plus minus. And people are talented or, gifted in different areas. My question is, first, how do you build that team? I'm sure you have events where you're like, we need a lot more people, more hands on deck. Do you do some kind of, auditions, or how do you catch them? How do you find them? I find that most of the time it's us actually talking and be like, hey, are you interested? Is this something that I see that you do? But maybe there's a more efficient way to do that, building the team, right? And number two, how do you continue to work with the team that is so all different all over the place, especially maybe for you, Katelyn? Do you get together one-on-one with them, like specifically like designers get together, photographers get together? Or is it just all people around the table? Or is it like Zoom calls? Or what is it? Because sometimes it's kind of an interesting, for efficiency's sake, I'm kind of like, how do we bring all these people around the table? And usually people are understanding where we hit a few different things at the same time. So sometimes photographer sits in the corner and weighs his turnout while, people that are posters, the caption discussion, the themes and topics are talking, and everyone's kind of on the same page. But sometimes it's just, you just think like, oh, maybe there's more efficient way to do that. I'm just curious to know how you guys do that.
It's a good question. I think, to answer that second one first, it's kind of both and. So we'll have different times and opportunities where like just social media people will be getting together, and just photographers or just designers. And if there's just like a one-man type of thing, like what makes the most sense, like a photographer could maybe go in a social media context. If it's like, oh, we only have one photographer or whatever, like kind of obviously if you have a smaller crew, lumping those where they make sense. But then we really try as a team to do stuff together that's not just training and like learning and talking. Like something that we love to do with our team, I don't know if you've heard of masterclass, but we've done this a couple times where we just do a masterclass and we get lunch and we go to someone's house, and it might be like something that kind of like connects with everybody's medium, or just like, speaking of creativity in general, or we grab lunch or whatever, but we try to do stuff together as a team that has nothing to do with work and has nothing to do with necessarily like growing or learning. And there is a place for that for sure, but just people want to be a part of something, and they want to be a part of a team, and they want to belong to a family. And so we try to balance the aspect of like, yeah, we're working and we're working hard, and there's a season for just growing and digging deep and training and that for sure. And then, but balancing the scale with like, hey, let's all just go out to lunch, and let's not even talk about work. Like, how's your kid and how's your whatever and your side thing and your hobby? Like, we just try to be together, and that does so much for the team in a really, really beautiful way. So I would say that. And then as far as growing the team, you might have something more eloquent to say about growing a team, but for us, it really has been that like, hey, I see this in you, or hey, do you want to do you take photos? Or hey, and I think if you cast that vision to all 10 people on your team, to have like eyes to see and ears to hear, like just in conversations with people in your church, like it's crazy how often you could be talking to somebody just after church and you're not trying to find a volunteer. You're just like, hey, what do you do? Like, what do you like to do? And they're like, telling you their hobbies, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, I kind of like paint on the side. And you're like, oh my gosh, you paint?
You don't even know that they're an artist. You're like, I didn't know this.
And I think just when you have ears to hear and just you're open to hear people's stories and to talk with people, you'll actually find out so much more. I feel like maybe everybody's like this, but creatives a lot of time, like when there's like this sense of inadequacy, like, oh, I paint, but like, I don't paint good enough to be on your team. Or like people will say us all the time, like, oh yeah, I'm like, I like to design, but not like, I can't do that. It's like, no, you actually can. Like, we need you. I think a lot of times people just think like, they see the pretty slides and they see the things on social media and they just think, oh, they got it figured out. They don't need me. Sure. And so they're not going to come and find you and be like, hey, could I be on your team? Because they think that you're crushing it and you are crushing it. And they think that you don't need any help. And so there might be a more eloquent like system, but for us, it is a lot of that and casting that vision to the people who do serve. Like, hey, if we all had ears to hear and just chances to slow down and hear people's stories and get to know people and what they love to do, and then just like pull up a chair and be like, maybe it's not for you, but do you want to come try it out? Or do you want to come, we're all getting lunch. Do you want to come to this thing? Do you want to come to this meeting and just see if it would be something that you would like to be a part of? And just making it just making it like a very welcoming space, I think is huge. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Fellowship over food is always like a plus. That's like, I feel like conversations over like food fellowship is always a great thing. Actually, I was thinking about Katelyn, Taylor, and Kurt's breakout yesterday. In team building, we don't really have like a big team, but we do have a lot of like volunteers, that we kind of round up. And as a leader, I think one of the things that Kurt was saying yesterday that really like was like affirming was like really coming in as a visionary, having a vision for when you do get the volunteers in the team, like just having a vision of like what it's going to look like, because you don't want people coming in and you have no idea how you're going to direct them. So I think having a guideline, some kind of a like a direction for them. So when the Lord starts bringing in the fold of volunteers, you actually have some stuff that you can kind of lead them towards to. And then and we're kind of very similar. I think our church, I mean, Katelyn wears many hats. I kind of wear many hats as well too. Like, and in that area of your question, as far as like rounding up creatives, I think don't be afraid like to put up like a little, servant needs. Like, you can be like, are you a creative? And then just, maybe some kind of direction. Like, if you're the leader, then like have your email or something. And we do this thing. We're gonna start back up again next year, and we kind of do this like creative roundup. Very inspired by like this thing that we do. We go to in San Diego. It's called Creative Mornings, and so we invite different kind of. It's more like a I guess like workshop-ish kind of like session where we invite different kind of creatives, and every quarter we have this theme that, like, for example, if this spring's theme is like about flourishing, then we invite someone who's like maybe gonna who's like maybe like a floral artist, and then expound on like what it means to be to be kind of like in their craft, because we had this like workshop before where it's about social media, and a lot of our I don't want to say older, but much seasoned saints really wanted to learn about social media, and they think it's just for like younger generation, but really like they wanted to learn. And so we invited everyone to come, and realizing like, wow, there's people that are really so gifted in this area that they just need guidance. And then so like doing that, and then you don't necessarily always have to have food, but if you can have like snacks and coffee, for those like, if your resources are limited, so having like those are always a plus, especially if it's in the morning, like little donuts and pastries and stuff is always great. But the training aspect of things, like Katelyn was saying, is always great. But also like the fellowship aspect, like sometimes we'll just gather like photographers and we'll do like a photo walk for a few hours. We're gonna go to Old Town Temecula. We'll do like there's no like rules. It's just take photos, and then we'll just eat after or something. And then same thing with like, if we have designers, usually we'll just round up at the church and what are you working on, recently, and like what have you been working on, and like and kind of just share ideas, and people like, I actually always wanted to learn this, and like if someone has that kind of like knowledge of something, we'll kind of teach them, or if we don't, we're just like, let's just look at it in YouTube together, or TikTok together or something. But there's so many ways to like do a creative roundup, and I think just depending on your church, like you can really get creative by doing it, and you don't necessarily always have to, charge, or it can just be a really like simple way to like get together.
I was visiting a church in LA recently called Zoe Church. And so I haven't done this, but they were telling us about this thing that they did. And I think they just did it after church in their I think they call it a courtyard. It's like outside, but like your lobby or whatever. And it was kind of like when you go to like a college fair and there's like all these different tables for like all these different colleges or whatever. And so they called it something fun and made it fun. But like every team, say, like had a pub table, had a little bit of info about their team, a team lead. And it was like, this is creative. This is the welcome team. This is the kids team. It's photography. So you could do it with multiple teams, or you could just do it with the facets of your creative team if it's just going to be a creative thing, and just have people available to chat with people, and just kind of having a presence is helpful to just know like, hey, there actually is a need and there is a team and there is a place for you, and just making it fun. Like, I don't know, they had like balloons and candy and just like things that's like, hey, stop by, ask questions, say, hey, see some of these faces that you probably see around all the time, but maybe didn't know what they were doing or how they were serving. And so that's like another fun, easy way, just after church in a lobby, and just having like a little presence like that is another good idea. Haven't done it. Don't know if it worked, but it seems like a great idea.
Just put it in your pocket and save it for later.
Do with that what you will.
So I guess my question is, what sort of practical steps do you guys have to recommend for ensuring that your creative ethos is diverse, in the sense that it's, congruent, it makes sense, and it's, if it's your church's branding, sure, or whatever, it's familiar to your church's congregation, but at the same time, it's expansive, has depth and breadth to show that, creativity is much larger than just one person's vision. It's the whole team's vision. Any insight or wisdom that you guys can speak on that?
It's a good question. So we try to, we try to switch things up like seasonally, so we don't get stuck in like one rut. And you might be able to speak better to this from a visual perspective, but we try to create like parameters instead of having like a hard brand, like it has to be this font and this color and this size font and this texture and this thing. That gets tired so fast. Like you're saying, there's not a lot of wiggle room within that. And so we try to create like a lookbook, if you will, that's like, here are the parameters for this season, that it's like, maybe it's these types of colors or these types of feels or these types of fonts, so that it feels good and it feels like it goes together and there's like a cohesiveness to it, but it's not like every graphic is like the same font and the same color with the church logo and it all is just like, at least from a social media perspective. Obviously art makes its way out in a lot of other places, but your eyes just get really tired of that and it's not very creative. And so we just try to create some parameters and let designers like be creative within these certain walls. And I think maybe you can speak to this more, but as a designer, I'm sure it's helpful to have some parameters and not, one, be like stuck into a box, but two, like do anything you want. Like that's kind of too big. One, is probably not going to end up looking awesome, but it's like hard to design where there is no like constraints or limitations. So that is kind of how we do it.
Yeah, I think the style, like I agree with her. Like the style guide and parameters is always great, but I think a lot of like, especially in the church demographic, there's so many ministries and facets of ministries, right? And so I think as a designer, coming from a designer perspective, you automatically want to just design logos for every ministry. And I think sometimes that can, there's a place for it, but sometimes that can get lost too. And so I think I'm looking at just using my church as an example. Like for Reliance, we have like this R logo, and it says Reliance, in a very serif font. And in our Reliance Kids, it's called Reliance Kids. And, I think a more sharp edges, blocky, it's a little bit more hard for like a kids ministry. So just in my opinion, so we kind of utilized the same logo, but made it softer. Think like, if you've seen Lilo and Stitch, the whole idea of Lilo and Stitch was like everything is round and like soft. And like, so we rounded like the fonts on Reliance Kids, finding something similar font to kind of round up the branding for Reliance Kids to make it a little bit more softer and friendly and kid friendly. And so that's kind of like what we did. And then with youth ministry, it's like, we used the hard edge, but we still like played with like, fun shapes. So we kind of stick around the same logos, but with youth ministry, we added fun colors in our branding so that through the years, because we have different seasons, so we can use different colors for that. But for the main church, I think having different like kind of hierarchies on logos, like having variations, like you have your horizontal, your I guess your vertical type of logo, the standalone icons. So you have like like she said, like you're not using the same logo over and over, but then you can apply it in different events to the season. So it's recognizable, but it's also like it's not like the same thing. It's always fresh. And then one of the examples we do for our youth ministry, I always love. I just go by quarter. So our branding, not branding, but our kind of like look in like social media, it always changes. So right now, and we always kind of theme it. So like this, our theme for winter is winter chill, right? So everything's kind of like in the blue scale, ice, whatever. And then we're getting ready for the spring. And so like we'll change that so that the kids recognize there's a break. And especially when studies coincide with the seasons. And so we break that, you can see that changes. And then I think in main social media for church, it kind of varies. Like you want to have not just photos, but also you don't want it to be a bulletin board. And so you want to have the variations of like encouraging scriptures, and people like to see faces. So photos with faces is always a great thing. Like for young adults, the moment you put like, oh, we have coffee in the morning, this is the coffee team, they're like, I love coffee. So I'm going to go, oh, I didn't know Bella was in the coffee ministry, and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question? Does that help a lot?
I think too, and just this may be a little bit of a side note, but when we're designing for social media specifically, and I know your question was probably a little bit bigger than that, but just speaking of social media, we are a lot of times just designing for social media. We're not designing for our church. We're just looking at like what is working on social media. I was sitting with someone the other day saying like, looking at the analytics of our top performing posts of the last year, there is a clear, like you can see, like a commonality in all of them, and it's like a lot of negative space and smaller font. So we are just looking at like what's working, what are people resonating with, and not trying to get too stuck to like it looking like us necessarily, as much as like what's landing on social, what's working in this era of social media, and trying to lean more into the trend in that way instead of just trying too hard to stick to us. And there is a tension in that, and there's a balance. Of course, you want it to feel like your church and have a consistency to it, but we try to not get too stuck in our own look and just kind of lean more into the season of social media. So that's just a little side thought.
And also change is inevitable, right? So I think people sometimes, it takes a while for them to adapt to change. So for example, like in my church, when Reels came out, we were doing Reels because it was fun, but for our church, it's like it took, I think, a few months for us to kind of like ease our way into this. So we use like our night of worship to kind of ease into that, because it's like you don't want to just like boom, like, oh, they're like, what is this change? What is this? So you want to kind of like, also there's like a lot of research and studying too, like with where social media and like just the trends of stuff is going, because sometimes it's hard to catch up. There's so many things that are changing all the time, and you don't want to just like boom, like just change, and you want to kind of like according to your church, so you want to give them space and time to kind of adapt to that, and I think it's all unique to like your community too, in your church. And so.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're a growing church. We're kind of small, getting bigger, but we have a pretty small team. And so we're mainly in charge of like announcement graphics, but like also social media. So should those be different, or should they be similar? And like, I don't know. I just feel like it's just a lot of work for a small team that we have. So just trying to balance all of that. And if you have any insight on like promoting things so that people, I was at your breakout yesterday, Katelyn. It was really, really good. But like in the church, like getting people to understand the events that are coming up. And because I feel like when we announce things, it's just like same old, what's going on? So like, how do we present that in a fresh, new way?
I think it is going to be so different, like church to church. I think that's a hard question, because how my church receives announcements is probably different than how your church and everybody else's church. So I think I think there's something to be said about consistency. Like wherever you're telling people the things is where they know to go and find the thing. So if that's your website, and that takes time, right? Like consistency over time is a real thing. So if that's your website, if it's a mailing list, so we have an email list that people can get on, and that's kind of where we send out some informational stuff. Or if it is social media, maybe it's like a highlight reel and you're putting something on your story, like the static on your story, and then you're saving it to a highlight bubble, like this month at Fresh Life, and somebody can like click through that bubble and you can keep that up to date. But I think the biggest thing is figuring out like where they're receiving the information and then just keeping it consistent so that people can know, like, this is where I go to find what's going on this month. This is where I go. It's not like, was that in the email, or was that on social, or was that on the website, or like, where did I find that thing? Was it in the bulletin? Like, if it's in a couple places, I think a few places is probably good because people are going to receive things differently, but it's just there's some level of consistency to it so people know exactly where to go for the information that your church gives out, I think is huge. And where that is might just be trial and error, figuring out what works for your people and the age demographic, like where do they like to find their info. So I think it's leaning into what works and then finding a consistency in that.
I think, yeah, I agree with that too. I think with us, it's like case by case or church by church kind of like demographic, because for ours, we do that same thing. Like we do that this week and then we have a video, but that's because we have the resource for a video announcement. But as far as like graphics wise, it has to be consistent. And I think, like with ours, there is a variation of graphics, but it's the same kind of like look all over the place. So like if you're gonna do rolling slides, you can put like a little bit of info in there, and then maybe if you have a link to something, on our church, our link is like reliancechurch.org/register. So if it's something that requires registering, it's always /register so that people can go there, and then all the events for the church is just like bottlenecked to one link, and so it's easy for them to find. Oh, I didn't realize the men's is having a breakfast like next week. So like people can just find it in one page, and even though it still has a small kind of like landing page that would go for the actual registration. We use, you guys probably Church Center and like MailChimp is also great resources for us to use, like because the videos, if people don't have social media, they're not going to see the video on social media, of course. But the MailChimp allows you to also link, videos to like that, so they can get the announcements. We put the announcements in there as well and you can get more. You can get as much detail as you want in an email, right? And so with as far as graphics, when you do social media, sometimes I think less is more. So you want to just give them like, this is what it looks like, and then if you want more info, direct them to the link. And I think that's the beauty of that, because you don't want it to just look like I said, bulletin board, and the graphics just get lost because there's so much info in it. And so I think having a consistency all over the platform, whether it's social media or the church rolling slides or something that you would send to a friend, have like those variations. And then and what's consistent is having templates for those, because since you do that consistently, so if like you have a wide slide, 1920 by 1080, do that, or whatever your screen size is, but like having that and having your square or your square-ish, and then your banner, if you have the MailChimp, having that as a template, especially for designers, it's a plus, because then they have that guideline to work with when they're doing stuff, for the consistent like announcements and stuff. Does that answer your question?
MailChimp is awesome too. I don't know. We use MailChimp for our mailing list, and there's other ones, but you can have people, and I know like Planning Center, there's a lot of ways you could do this, but people can be on a certain list, like families or students or whatever, and you're giving only people like the pertinent information, so they're in like a segment of the list. So if it's like, this is a whole church-wide thing, you can send it to everybody. If it's just a youth thing, it's like your 95-year-old grandma doesn't need to get the youth winter bash announcement, So you can kind of like segment out so that people know that they get pertinent information from you, and then they're going to be more likely to read your emails if it's like, oh yeah, this is actually going to be valuable to me, not like, oh yeah, they always email me about Kidsmen and I don't even have any kids. So then they like unconsciously start like registering your emails as not valuable to them, and maybe they don't read them, or maybe they do. But if you can kind of build out segments of email lists where you're really just getting people the pertinent information that is applicable to them, then they're just going to care more. It's not going to get lost in the clutter. So that's another feature that MailChimp can do that's really awesome.
And MailChimp has like, you can create templates too. So like you don't have to feel like you have to build your this week email every week. You can literally use the same from the last week and just change up stuff. So
And it's really good to have a mailing list if you don't
It
have a
really
mailing
is.
list, because it's the only real estate online that you own.
Yeah.
Like Instagram can just be like, yoink, you don't have an account anymore. No reason. You broke a guideline.
Yep.
You don't know what the guideline is, but you don't have an account anymore. Like any of that can be robbed from you. And hopefully it doesn't. And this isn't like a doom and doom. But like you see these creators who have like built these accounts to like thousands of followers, and it's their well-being and it's their job, and then one day it's like yoink and they don't have it anymore. So I hope that doesn't happen to anybody's social media accounts, but it could. And so it's really important to have a digital thing that you own, which is your mailing list is the only thing that you actually have control over. And so I would say if you don't have a mailing list, it's a really good thing to have.
This is more of like a specific content related question, like in an effort to make your feed like not a bulletin board, like instead of just like announcing the event, recapping the event, like that kind of thing, like what kind of content do you suggest? Like generally, like are there things that you shy away from? Like do you lean towards more of like the relatable content, or is that more for like platforms that are different, like Instagram versus TikTok, like that kind of a thing is kind of what I was wondering.
Were you my breakout yesterday?
I was. Yeah.
Okay. So I would say content that is valuable to people is huge. So you don't want to be a billboard, and recap is awesome. Like people like to see people's faces, and we kind of have two modes of content. So we do announcements, like I was saying, we try to predominantly keep announcements in the story. There is a time and a place for it to be on the feed, but typically events have like a short shelf life, right? Like once your event is over, it's over, and that doesn't need to live on your feed forever. Otherwise, a new person's coming and it's just like an archive of all of these events that are over. So, and that's just how we do it. That's not gospel. That's just what we do. But so we try to keep announcements in the story. And then the feed, we try to keep valuable content. So that's just things that are connecting with people, encouraging people, scripture, whatever, like that type of content. And then stuff that is showing off what God's doing at our church. That's just what we call it. We call it show off content. We're just either sharing people's stories, we're showing what God is doing. And that could look like recap stuff. It's like, look at this event, look what God did. We try to tell stories of people in our church and what God's doing in their life, and life change stories. And so I feel like I could probably talk forever about that, but in a nutshell.
Yeah, meet the team, meet the staff is always a great way, because parents, especially in youth ministry, like, okay, I want to know who my kids are, like, I'm sending my kids to, and so I think it's like, and make it like not so serious, like make it fun, like, oh, like, Michael loves like, video games, and then he also like loves ice cream, so it's like, what's your, you can ask common questions to like leaders and have that like as part of your feed. Or there's so many things and ways to be creative in that demographic. But like she said, kind of gauge kind of like where like your church is, or like whatever platform you're doing, like and you can kind of see like what people kind of love seeing and stuff like that. So
yeah, I would say try different stuff and then look at what works and then do more of that. So if that's different, like for your church, like what my church likes is going to be different than what your church likes. And it's also what you have, like the platform that you've built, right? Like you're going to probably attract more of the same. So I would say, yeah, like stories, photos, recap, encouragement, carousels, reels. Like I would try over a season, like different types of content, and then just pay attention, looking at like the analytics and seeing what is resonating with people, and then just leaning into more of that. Because what that looks like for you is going to be different than probably literally everybody else. And so there's something value about just seeing what people care about and what they resonate with. And I think there's like no shade in like stickers on your Instagram story. Like, what do you want to see more of? Like people do that, and it could probably feel weird to like do that on your own, but you don't feel weird when you see somebody else post that. Like that's just like market research. Like, hey, here's a poll. What do you want to see more of? Do you want to see photos? Do you want to see encouraging content?
Yeah.
Do you want to see recap content? And just like
things.
ask the people what they want to see.
It is nice. It's a good way to survey to like, what we're, especially, like what ministry, where they're at and stuff. And I was thinking about like archiving, like, and like, that's like, if you're like me, like, we have so many youth events, and like sometimes my youth pastors always like, can you like repost this again or post another thing about the bowling night because it's coming up this weekend, and and you posted that like weeks ago, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna stack again another ad. It's okay, just just submit and just do it, and then you can archive that after the event, because then like it is important to have like that announcement again, and like she said, if what's neat about like the stories is you can do the story and just link the registration in that, and then it's posted. You don't have to put in your feed, so there's ways to do
That's
it.
what we do.
And yeah, it's just it's so you can keep your grid beautiful and cool.
Yeah.
Just another question for you guys. Last question, we were talking about building a mailing list. As somebody who I like the concept of email, and it is a very useful tool. However, as a user, I find it to be this clunky thing that ends up just clogging up my feed, right? And is prone to give me anxiety. What do you guys have any other recommendations besides mailing lists in terms of building up, like, let's say, contact points for other people in case you lose a social platform or whatever have you? And if you still want to talk about the mailing list, what are some ways of building that without feeling spammy or actually provide value to people instead of just being like this, give me your number basically type of thing?
Yeah. So just speaking to the email list, and I will answer your first question after. You nailed it with just saying it being valuable. Like if people know, there are emails that you get that you throw in the trash before you even open them 100% of the time. It's like, I'm on this mailing list, don't know how I got on it, and I literally have never once opened an email, and I throw it away every time because I know I'm never gonna want it. And then there's emails that you open more often because you care what's in them and you signed up for them for a reason. So I would say making sure that your emails, they are a place for announcement, but as much as you can add value into them, if that's you're linking your weekend message, you're linking resources, like, hey, we're in a season right now as a church leading up to Easter where we're fasting, we're fasting our way to Easter. And so I'm going to send an email to my church and I'm going to say, here's 4 resources for this fasting journey. Here's a book, here's a podcast, here's a whatever, here's a message. And as you prepare your heart to fast, these things might help you. And somebody who's fasting wants that email because they're like, yeah, that's helpful to me. I want that information. And then at the bottom of that, I'm going to be like, also church this weekend, 9, 11, and 5, youth group on Wednesday. But I'm going to lead with the value. And my subject line is going to be 4 resources for fasting. It's not going to be get to church this weekend or whatever. And so the more that you can infuse value into your emails, the more that people are going to want to open them. And that can look a lot of different ways. As far as growing your mailing list, you can do this through your social media platform. And this is, there's a little bit more like steps to this, but YouTube could teach you everything. You can create a piece of valuable content. So say your pastor's in a series about whatever, and you turn that into a PDF, and you take those messages and you boil them down into like 4 really valuable devos that somebody could read, and you put it you designed it into a PDF, and you call it an ebook to 5 days. You make it like a YouVersion plan, kind of, like 5 encouragements when you're feeling hopeless, and you pull all this content from a weekend message. This is a very elaborate, I'm just giving you one example, and you put it into your ebook, you put it on your social media, and you say, hey, this is a free download this ebook. And by downloading it, they get the ebook, and you don't spam them with a billion things. You'd be like, here's your free download. Hope it blesses you. Hope it encourages you. And they're also on your mailing list. So you're giving value. You're offering value. You're giving the value. And then they're on your mailing list. And that's it. So you're offering. You're not asking. You're saying, here, how can we serve you? And just knowing like what God's doing in your church and what season you're in, and what would be helpful for the people in your church based on what you're studying and learning. Hey, we put together this list of resources. You can sign up at this link. They sign up, they get the list of resources, and then they're on your mailing list. So your mentality is resourcing and serving and giving, and then you also have the opportunity to give them announcements when you need to, but that you're thinking of it as a way of giving as opposed to asking. So that's how, in a nutshell, I would say you can do email well. Other than email, we do texting also. I don't know if you use a texting platform. I know there's a few. We use one called Clearstream. And so we use it in a bunch of different ways for a bunch of different reasons, but you can get a keyword. So we have you can text Fresh Life to 97,000. And you can do a lot of stuff there. So when they do that, they get on our texting list, and then they get an auto response that's like, hey, how can we serve you? And there's all these check boxes. I need prayer. I want to get baptized. I want to sign up for the winter bash. I want to blah, 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 blah. And then we figure out how we could serve them. But then it's a really easy call to action. So our host on the weekend is like, hey, if you want to get baptized, you can text Fresh Life to 97,000. If you're new here, we want to get you a Bible. If you need a Bible, you can text Fresh Life to 97,000. Hey, and it's so easy for people to remember. And then they're getting onto text lists. And text is probably better than email because nobody leaves a text unread. Who leaves a text unread? You're crazy. If you're one of those people with 457 unread texts, somebody in here is one of those people, and it's you.
That stresses me out.
Everyone other than Katie opens every single one. Okay, that's not bad. There's people that have hundreds of unread text messages. They crazy. But for the most part, people open their text. So texting is another good one. And Clearstream is what we use, but I'm sure there's a myriad of others. That was a very long answer. Hope that helped a little bit.
I just echo her in that, because honestly, email should be resourceful and valuable. And so I think, and it takes a lot of administration too, in doing an email. And so I think having that, and having that kind of just organized helps a lot, because people do like to know, especially the older saints in our church, they like to know all the info and in what's going down, and also they're like, I want to hear the message, and sometimes you don't remember where do I go, what's the link again? So having that and the resources part that she was saying, if you have sermon questions that coincide with the resource and stuff, having all that stuff is so helpful, because then it's not you're sending a million emails but it's all streamlined to this one thing. And then obviously if you have special ones, like she said, there was a great message that you want to do some kind of an ebook and emphasize on that later on, in the season. And you can do that as a separate one. And that's a special one because people can just, do that too. So are we out of time?
No, we started about 10 minutes late. So we have about 10 minutes till about 12:45. Cool. Oh, we got two hands. Let me go. She hasn't asked a question yet. We'll come back to you. All right.
How do you go about planning your kind of social media strategy / calendar for the upcoming month, or I guess what time period do you even kind of try to plan for?
You guys might be better than us in this. We're planning content a week at a time. I would love to say we're like this church with a 3-month content calendar, and there's people that do it, and God bless them. I don't know how they do it. Maybe Katelyn could tell you her secrets, but we are typically, there are certain things that are on the calendar further out, events or things that are on the calendar. So there are certain things, but for the most part, we're pulling a lot of content out of our weekend. So we're pulling all of our valuable content out of the weekend message. That's where we're pulling quotes and clips, and this value-driven content that I was talking about yesterday is all coming out of the weekend message. So a lot of times we're going 1 week at a time. And so I try to have me and my team have a content calendar by Sunday night or Monday morning. And that just depends on I have people on staff who can do that. And if you're working with volunteers, obviously you need to be flexible with where they can serve and how that looks. But Sunday is actually really people want to serve on Sunday for the most part. And so if that's an hour after church that you guys are, sitting down and planning for the week or whatever that looks like for you, for us, it looks like Sunday or Monday, planning out all the posts for that coming week. And then we use a project management platform called Basecamp that is Chef's Kiss, and our whole team is in there. So we just you can put in to-dos, so they're just you can assign it to a certain person with a due date and all the info. It's hey, I need this quote graphic, here's the inspiration, here's the quote, it's due on Tuesday, and it's assigned to Royce to design. So now he has a list of things that I'm asking for, and obviously if you're the same person who's designing and posting, then that's just a to-do list for yourself of here's where we're going for the week. But I think as much as you can batch content, like you're saying, just blocking out an hour or 2 hours and planning out your whole week in one go. So it's not like Wednesday at 4 and you're like, what am I going to post today?
Yeah.
Like that's so like taxing on your brain to always be on like that. So I would say as much as you can at the beginning of a week. And if you have the luxury to plan out 2 or 3 weeks ahead, then I would say do that. We're pretty week to week, personally, to be honest.
We're okay. It's kind of bad, but we're like very similar because it's we don't have a big team, and so it's very limited to like ahead of time. But like she said, the bigger events, the same thing. Like those are like takes a lot of planning, but that's kind of rolls into the I guess the promoting part of it, like in schedule. But as far as like I do a lot of stuff, like I said, with youth and young adults, that's like a week to week by case because. And I'd like to ask kind of like our youth pastors are like, what are you covering this Wednesday or whatever, like what's happening this week? So like planning actually that week, you can kind of see where, so you're not doing like the event this weekend is on Tuesday and you're posting that again before the midweek on Wednesday. So I think just having that consistency of like, like let's literally like making like a blueprint of like what you're going to do for the week and stuff helps a lot. And I don't know.
And you could too, like, have. I know I was talking to you guys, so I know like that you are working full time and all that stuff. So in your case, I would say too, if you have like a calendar where it's like on Monday we post an encouraging thing from the weekend, and on Wednesday we post a photo and a story, and on Friday we post whatever announcement is for the week or something, where you have this like formula where it's like an encouragement, a quote, and an announcement or whatever. And that way you're not thinking like of all the options in the world. You're just like, what announcement am I going to plug in here? What encouragement am I going to plug in here? Then it takes like half of the thinking out of it. And maybe you want to switch that up like seasonally or whatever, but just kind of having like a format where it's like this week I'm just plugging in these like holes as opposed to what am I going to post this week is a very open-ended question that can be hard when you're a team of 2 and you're doing a lot and you're juggling all the things. Like as much as you can like automate in that way, I think is just going to help a lot. So
and sometimes like the break of like sometimes you don't have enough photos to do like a photo and then like graphic and stuff. So what we start doing in ours is like we infuse the photo with our midweek promotion for our youth group, so that even if I did a graphic the day before, there's a photo for the next day and it's not just like graphic. You have there's people on the next post and it's still looks kind of like nice in the grid. Yeah, it's not a bulletin board. So like there's like some ways you can kind of cover that. And if you don't have a lot of time, especially if you're doing it by yourself, you can cover that in the week in the week without having to stress yourself out. Like I don't have enough photos to do in between these 2 graphics, but you can actually do that by doing that too. So.
Another question I thought about was something that we had been discussing a lot, and again, we kind of are landing on it's a preference kind of thing, but I'm curious if you had discussed this between yourselves. Do you diversify the information that you offer people on different platforms? Of course, we can't make it all perfectly different for every single platform we do out there, but say if you have a couple of base ones, important ones that are big to you, like Facebook, Instagram, or is it constantly like reshare from one to another, or do you try to like make it a little different, a little bit more interesting, so based on the demographic that's there and there? Just curious about that, because obviously it's easier just to go push through to all platforms at the same time, the same content, or do you try to just make it different?
The correct answer is that they should all be different. The real answer, if we're all being honest in church, is that it's crossover a lot just because of the capacity and the priority of where you're going to be able to spend your time. The right answer is that you should be creating and designing for the platform and not cross-posting. That's what the people would say. The experts would say. But we oftentimes, there are certain times when we like diversify, or we only put something on Facebook if it's more like announcement driven and it might not make it on our Instagram feed. Like we might go Instagram story and Facebook for like something more promotionally. So there's times when we like diversify a little bit. At the bare minimum, we try to like do the right like dimensions. Like there's not just like a square everywhere. It's like Facebook's going this way, Instagram's going this way, stories going. So we try to like design format wise for the platform. So if I'm asking for like a quote graphic, I'm gonna get it in three. It's the same quote, but I'm gonna get it in 3 different dimensions. When we do carousels, we do carousels a lot. I don't know if you guys have figured this out yet, but we do it as a carousel on Instagram, and then on Facebook, we'll put one like strong quote in a graphic, and then I'll write out all the substance that was in the carousel in a big old caption, and those like pop off on Facebook because you don't want an album. It doesn't format the same on Facebook. So we try to at the bare minimum format properly for the platform, and if you have the capacity to design different stuff and create 2 content calendars and know like maybe our older demographic is on Facebook and our younger demographic is on Instagram, and you kind of do, come up with valuable content that's different for those people or announcements that's different, more power to you, but I think don't feel bad if you can't. I feel like we don't have a huge team, but we have a decent sized team, and that's hard for us too. Because yes, social media is the thing, but it's like that's one of all of the billion things. You're probably all wearing like 7 hats minimum. Yeah. So I would say if you can and where you can, diversify at least the dimension so that your like the look and the feel is proper for the platform. And if you can diversify the content, that's awesome. But if you can't, I personally, you might think differently. I would say it's better to be populating both of those places than to not, because you don't want to crossover. So we're generally putting the same or similar stuff on both of our platforms.
And it also doesn't have to always mirror like Facebook and Instagram. Like in our case, for our Facebook platform, not for the main church, but for the other smaller ministries, it's mainly like a info page that, especially for the youth ministries, parents want to know what's happening at youth.
Facebook
the youth,
is a good place.
Yeah, it's a good place for that. And you don't necessarily can put link in the bio on Facebook. So we take, I'll have the same caption, but we take that part off. So you kind of have to edit some stuff for your copy for Facebook. But I echo what she says about the knowing which element of graphic you put on the platform, because it's a big deal. It's a big thing. And for Instagram, same thing. I think Instagram has more of our kind of like, in our case, like our, if you want to have the in-betweens in the schedule, like the verses and like the little devotions and stuff. But it's a case-by-case thing. Like if it permits for you to do that in like the demographic of your church for a specific group or your main church, then I think the Devo resource and all that stuff is really important. But yeah.
Yeah, I would say at the bare minimum, the best that you could do is design the proper dimensions for the proper things. Like a square on the story, like just take the 7 extra minutes maybe. And I know that might feel like a lot when you're doing so much, but just to design it into a story, like I know it might feel like the same, but it goes. Oh,
and if you don't have time, I also like the square-ish kind of like dimension where it's like when you put in your grid, it's just the info in the square is cool, but then when you can repost it on your story, it's not quite the story, but it's still big enough, bigger than a square. Yeah. So it's like you still kind of almost like get like a concert poster, kind of style. But yeah, it's very important to have that different kind of like variations of like design elements that you put into your platforms.
And also maybe not cross-posting in the sense of like you put it on Instagram and then you toggle that like put this on Facebook, that like thing where it'll go at the same time. That is, for whatever reason, like not awesome for the algorithm. And people know it's like this was cross-posted from Instagram. Yeah. Like that kind of sends a message you're not really on Facebook. So it could be the same content, but posted on Instagram and then posted, hopefully with its proper dimensions, on Facebook, even if they're the same thing, doing them separately.
Scheduling too is good for like if you that's a good way to not the cross do the toggle thing. I schedule usually the Facebook and then I'll do the Instagram sometimes and stuff.
Does that answer your question? We said a lot of words. So cool. Amazing.
All right. I think just for the sake of time, I think that's going to probably have to do it. I'm sure you two will be around and be available. So they're around and available.